want. This is for downloading and
Does this
following
now?
along. Probably not. I mean, if you just need to give your username to none.
If you've not been added,
Are you in this
It's
list?
better to report this as
Up to you.
How do I
I would recommend doing it.
Are
did
you?
he message me right now? No.
Oh, I don't actually have access to Discord.
Oh, I do.
I have not gotten any Discord
How do you
messages.
receive requests?
You get an
GitHub is
email
like
usually?
the worst website in the world, so you can also just manually type this.
Ah,
You want to post that in like announcements or something?
I would, but I don't have access to Discord.
should
I
I
post that in announcements?
Yes.
Cool.
Cool, I did it.
Anyone else need to be added?
If your name is here, you need to be added. This is one of you. You need to type this link. If you haven't given us your username, you need to come up and give us your username. Your Git username. We need to add you to the repository.
Does it say Grace slash or hyphen Brody?
Yes.
Yes. You need to type this URL. Can you see this?
No.
It's the basically the repo URL and then / invitations.
Can I give you my
Yes.
Eagle 1998?
Here we are. Okay, you also need to type this.
Or you can go to your email and find the invitation.
No, it doesn't send an email.
It doesn't? I got one.
Yeah, I got
Wait.
one.
It
It
does?
Depends on your settings.
It does depend on your settings, and it also depends on your settings if you get a notification at all. Because
Why would I
GitHub
do
is
that?
the worst website in the world.
Awful. Just awful.
Anyway, everyone has to use it.
Yay.
Unless you use GitLab, which is literally the
Yay.
exact same website,
Yeah.
but better.
Bucket, which is the exact same website but worse.
Or you can host your own repo on a Raspberry Pi with like 2 gigs of storage.
I mean, honestly, it's not bad. I'd be a fan of that.
Not the worst.
Do you think we'll finish in time for the Godot workshop?
All of you are staying for the Godot workshop.
Okay.
Oh. You've been conscripted. I guess the Git workshop was just a bait.
Yep. It was a trick. You're learning Godot whether you like it or not.
Perfect.
Hey.
How long does it take to download? I haven't downloaded.
It's actually very small.
It's like 24 megabytes.
Cool. Should I get the 32 meg? The version of this?
No, 64 bit.
64, yeah.
Okay.
Unless you're living in 2005. All right, so we
Did you
can.
start the
Yes, I
recording?
did. I think so. Should be up.
You,
All right.
You
It is-
started the stream, but not the recording.
Oh, we don't use the recordings for anything.
Oh, we don't?
No. Because they're posted to YouTube automatically.
Oh, right. Okay.
All right, so hello everyone. Welcome to the Git workshop. We are going to be using Git. If it's not necessarily required, but we would like you to be on the repo to be able to like do interactive stuff because we're going to be creating merge conflicts and everything.
Right.
So yeah. Otherwise, just clone the repo. Make sure you can you have access to it. It looks like this. Let me just open up real quick. VGDC Git workshop. So you should have a little message.txt. If you're not in baby mode, you'll have a .git above it. Otherwise, it's hidden normally, so you might not see that. So the message.text says, Lippo says he loves you and hopes you are having a fantastic day. If you pulled at the beginning when you just got here, you might want to pull again. We're going to get to what that does, but yeah. All right, so intro to Git. What is Git? Well, I mean, first off, we can probably introduce ourselves. My name is Kat. I am the programming director.
My name is Duncan. I am a programming officer.
I am Kyle. I live here.
Hello.
So, what is Git? Git is version control. Think of it as Google Drive for your game, kind of. Git isn't necessarily something that you use online all the time, but we mostly use it kind of as an online thing. So basically what Git allows you to do is keep a log of the previous versions of your software. So what a good repo will do is basically, as you're developing software, or basically anything, in our case it's games, you basically tell the repository about the changes every so often, periodically. So you basically have an initial version of the repo with some amount of files, and then as you work on those files and change those files, you periodically check them in. And so each time you do that, it creates a version. So as you do that, you may make a mistake, or you may want to get something from a previous version that you don't have anymore. Git allows you to do that. You can go back to any previous version you've checked in, and basically do a lot of cool stuff to make sure you don't lose work. What we are also using it for is team collaboration. So what Git allows you to do as well is host remote repositories. So basically you can upload your initial repository and then upload your changes as you make them. You can also download changes that other people have made, and in that way it allows us to do easy team collaborative stuff. And it's a lot easier than just sharing files and sharing changes manually.
If that was complicated, it'll make sense once we start doing something.
Yes.
It sounds a lot like, what is it? Cloud? Unity Cloud?
Yes.
In a way, right?
Unity Cloud is also source control, except for Git actually functions.
A note on terminology: repo or repository is your project files.
Yeah. So we
So
have
everything
this
from text to images.
list of terminology here that I've been just dropping into conversation. So repo or repository, it's your set of files. So in a Unity game, you have your assets folder, all the project folders, the mysterious files that sometimes it needs and sometimes disappears and makes your project fail. All of those things are in your repository. So those are the things that Git is keeping track of. And yeah, so we just call that folder your repository. Remote repositories are basically the online version of that. So if you have a remote repository, it is being held on a server somewhere, and you push your local repository to it. Yeah, it's basically a centralized version of your game. So if you have two team members working on their own local repositories, they're going to be synchronizing with the remote repository, which is basically the origin. Changes. So basically, Git keeps track of a bunch of changes instead of independent versions of your files. So basically, if you have a repository and then you change a letter or a line, Git's going to keep track of that change, and you'll be able to reverse that change or go back several changes. A commit is a set of changes that you've basically packaged up and told Git is a version. So what you will do as you're working is you make a bunch of changes, get your game into maybe a working state or some sort of state that makes sense to be able to share with your teammates. You would package up all your changes into a commit. And commits have names. So you basically say, okay, I want to commit all of my work, and the name would be changed the player script to be faster or something. Branches, parallel versions of a repo. So we won't be using branches too often. It's nice to kind of know what they are, but for game development, it's not super common. So branches allow you to basically have two different versions of a repository that stem from the same place. So say you want to work on a separate feature, then you might branch and then have the main branch get different changes, and then your branch have, maybe experimental changes, like you want to do a refactoring of some major code. I didn't explain it very well, but we'll do a little bit more on branches later. The working directory is the actual physical files on your hard drive. You will be, if you want to revert to a different commit, your working directory would be changed. So it's basically like the actual files that you're working with on your hard drive. Anyone have any questions so far? It was a very large word dump and a lot of terminology, but it'll start to make sense as we use the terminology to talk about our projects. So, Git versus GitHub. Git is a piece of free and open source version control software. It is a piece of software, it's a program. GitHub, on the other hand, is a website for hosting remote repositories. So how we've been mentioning, if you have a remote repository, it's stored on a server somewhere. GitHub is one of the servers that you can host your remote repositories to. There are a lot of other websites that do the same thing. You can even host your own remote repositories, but the popular ones are GitLab, Bitbucket, other ones like SourceForge, I guess, but that's SVN. GitHub is the most popular. It was recently acquired by Microsoft. Some people are kind of angry at it right now. I don't personally use it for a lot of reasons. GitLab is open source, and I use that one. But the club, for the most part, uses GitHub. So yeah, you are free to use whatever host software, host website that you want with your team. You just have to communicate that with your team. So, Git Clients. Git as a program is, what we call a monolithic piece of software. It's just a program, but it can act more like a protocol for sharing repositories. So, if you saw what I was doing earlier, this is basically what using Git looks like. It is a command line program. So you just type Git and then your arguments. That isn't always the most user-friendly option, and so there are a lot of what we call front ends to Git that basically add graphical interfaces so that you can, manage your repositories graphically, add commits, through a graphical program, so on and so forth. There are a couple of popular clients. There are some, paid clients. There's TortoiseGit, Git Kraken, and SourceTree. I don't have any experience with those, but I've heard good things about TortoiseGit. I think they're all free, but I don't know. For this workshop, however, we're just going to be using Git as a program. This is commonly referred to as Git Bash because of reasons that I'll talk about in a very small bit. But yeah, what we're going to be using is Git Bash. And the reason we're doing this is because if you kind of abstract away some of the things that you need to know to use Git, you can end up breaking things very easily because Git is a very complicated piece of software, and if you don't treat it as a complicated piece of software, you might break things. So this gives us a more firm understanding of what we're doing, and then later you can use one of these Git front ends to, make your life easier, basically. You can use basically any front end you like. It doesn't matter that your whole team is working with the same front end. It's all going to interface exactly the same way. We don't recommend using GitHub Desktop as a club because GitHub Desktop, we've had a lot of issues with GitHub Desktop in the past. It has been the source of a lot of problems for teams' repositories. It kind of oversimplifies some things, and yeah. You can use it if you want, we just don't recommend it. Does that make sense? Cool. So, we're going to get into the basics. So, if you've been added to the repository, you can, we're going to be cloning the repository. First, you're going to need Git. I hope all of you have downloaded Git for your platform already. If you have not, the download is here, gitscm.com/downloads. You can just search Git in Google and find this. You can download, this link will have downloads for Windows and Mac. You don't need to do this if you're on Linux because you probably already have it installed. If you don't have it installed, you probably know how to install it through your distro. Otherwise, we can get going. Show of hands, does anyone not have this installed yet?
I'm installing it right now.
Okay.
I have to.
So while you're installing that, I'm going to bore you with a history lesson.
Yay!
So, a little bit of background. So, Git was developed in 2005 by a person named Linus Torvalds. Linus Torvalds is known for developing the Linux kernel. And when he was developing the kernel, the kernel is a very large piece of software, and it involves a lot of software developers that are communicating and coordinating all across the earth. It's like everyone everywhere is kind of contributing to this software. And before Git was developed, they were having a lot of issues coordinating with that because the software that was available that could do source control at the scale that the Linux kernel needed was either paid, it wasn't compatible with the Linux distribution model, or it just sucked. So Linus was like, I'm going to make my own, and he did, and it was great. So, but the reason I tell you that is because it explains why we interface with Git the way we do. Git is a command line utility, and it was developed to be run on Linux. And Linux programs are often run from the shell or the command line. And so that's why if you see that we're using something called Git Bash, is because we're actually interfacing it with the Linux shell called Bash. And I can talk a lot more about that if you let me. But yeah, that's basically what that is. On Windows, like I just said, you are interfacing Git with a shell called Bash. It is not native to Windows. You can use Git through the Windows command line. It just sucks. It's an awful experience. Don't do it. Otherwise, if you have Git, you can basically just search Git in your start menu, and you'll see something called Git Bash. And what that does is it opens a Bash terminal. And so this doesn't look very similar to your command prompt for good reason. So yeah, this is Bash. Another thing is if you have your repository open in the file manager and you installed Git correctly, you can right-click in the empty space and click on Git Bash here. And what that's going to do is it's going to open a terminal and it's going to put you in that directory.
Or the Git or the Git repository that we downloaded. Am I supposed to have the master or no? Because mine got. I'm not sure. Never mind.
How did you download it?
I just downloaded the zip file.
Yeah, okay, so big thing here, we probably should have mentioned this. If you download the zip file, you're not actually downloading the repository, you're downloading the working directory. So, so we're going to get to cloning really soon. So if you don't have the repository yet, don't worry, we're going to get to that like really soon. So right now, just open Git Bash if you can.
Any questions so far?
Does everyone have Git Bash open if you have Git installed? So Git on Windows. So a little introduction into Bash. You have a directory that you are located in when you're in Bash. right now we are in desktop VGDC Git workshop. So you know where the desktop is, and then in that desktop we're in this folder. If we cd, we're going to go back to home. This basically just means your user directory. So you know, C users, in this case VGDC, and then the cd command that I typed, that means change directory. So if you just opened up Git, you're probably going to be here. So you can change directory into wherever you want your repository to go. So say I wanted to go into my desktop. Then you just cd desktop, and you'll be there. I believe it is case sensitive. Might not be case sensitive on Windows. Actually, I don't think it is. So yeah.
If anyone's used the Windows command line, a lot of the commands in Bash are similar. There are some different ones though.
Yeah. Again, if you don't want to mess with the whole CD business, you can right-click somewhere and click Git Bash here. And that's just going to automatically change you into that directory.
Sorry, can you do that one more?
Yeah. So you right-click anywhere, click on Git Bash here, and it'll open this window, and you'll be in that directory.
That might be a Windows only thing.
This is a Windows-only thing.
Something like for it in
Yeah. I have never used Git on Mac,
Me
and if
neither.
you're using it on Linux, you know how to do this.
I have. You can right click in Finder and say Open Terminal here.
Yes.
I actually tried that and it got bugged. It said like application wasn't found.
Oh, that's not good.
I could like open it manually, like if I just went to the file, but like
Yeah.
right clicking
So
didn't work.
if you have trouble right-clicking, just open it manually.
Oh,
Wait.
you can only right click folders in Macs to open a terminal there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Um, so on Mac, do any of you have Macs here? On a Mac?
I'm using one, but like this isn't my main computer.
Okay. So if you're on a Mac, if you know how to open the terminal, it's done through the terminal. You don't have to do this whole Git Bash business.
It's already done.
Yeah. So, what you want to do now is we can basically skip that. What you want to do now is you want to be in the directory that you want the repository to be in. So I'm on my desktop. I already have it here, so let me delete it really quick. Not that. VGDC Git. So when you're in the directory that you want it to be in, mine's just on the desktop, then the command to clone a repository, that is basically copy it from the remote to your local computer, it is Git Clone and the URL. It's the full URL. So when you're on the repositories page on GitHub, there's going to be this big green cloner download button. Does everyone see this? So you don't want to click on open on in desktop or download zip. You want to click on this URL up here. You can click on this copy to clipboard button, or you can just click it and hit Control-C. So when you have this URL copied and you're in the directory that you want it to go in, you can type git clone. In Git Bash, you can right-click and paste. Or not.
You have it in your
Pretty sure I did. Yeah. So one thing, if you do paste, Windows is weird and does things. You want to delete the HTTPS / and type it again.
What?
If you don't, you'll get an error.
Not bad.
Just trust me. It's really weird and it still happens. I don't know why.
That's never happened to me.
Same.
Um,
I usually use for shift insert.
Yeah.
Maybe that's different.
So, once you have it cloned, you will see the directory appear wherever you cloned it. So you can open it up and make sure you have message.txt. I'll give y'all a second to do that. Raise your hand if you have any questions or having any issues.
Sorry, but how do you do the console? Right click.
You can, so you can right click. The shortcut is Shift Insert if you want to know.
How much do you have to get rid of?
Oh, okay. So yeah, let me demonstrate that again. So you have it like this. So you go right up to the start of GitHub before GitHub. Just delete it, and then type https:// again.
Oh, I messed up in putting the carrots around the URL.
So you can. So to go back to the command that you just typed, you can just hit the up arrow.
It's just CD, it's not dollar. Oh, you still need to put the location.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Yep, you don't need the dollar.
All right. So I am going to move on.
And you can clone it. The method they used.
So
So you would write git clone and the address.
now that you have it cloned and you're still in Git Bash, you actually need to change into the directory that you just cloned. So you can do two things. You can either close the window and go into the folder and Git Bash there, or you can cd and then type the directory, which is VGDC-git. And if you've typed it a little bit, you can hit tab and it'll autocomplete for you. So either one works. Cool. So this is the basic Git cycle. So assuming you've cloned your repository and you've made some changes, let's say you're working on a game and you added a player character. So you want to push your changes so that your team can have your changes. So what you would do is you would type git add period. So let me make a change real quick by editing this. Loves you. You're having a super fantastic day. So say that you just made a change. So you would git add dot. So the explanation of this command, git add dot, is to add changes, or to basically say, git, I want you to acknowledge these changes, is git add and then the file name. So you can say git add message.txt. However, you really don't want to type all of the files that you changed one after another. So you can add entire directories that you changed. And when you type git add dot, that translates to acknowledge all of the changes in this directory, which is saying acknowledge all of my changes, if that makes sense. So one that we don't have listed here, but one that I use literally all the time, is called git status. And git status tells you what you have changed. So it says modified here in green. That means I modified message.txt and Git knows that I want to add my changes into a commit. So I often just type git status as just a default to see where you're at. So once you have all of your changes added and Git knows about them, then you want to commit your changes, or package them into a commit. That command is git commit m, and then git commit -m, and then a message. So this is basically just saying commit all of the changes you know about and add a message to it. So the message is basically the commit's name. The message that you put is basically what the other team members are going to see your changes as. So if you did something like add a character, then your commit message would be add character. Small note, the actual way to phrase commit messages is a little bit weird. A lot of people say added character as their commit message. It is more common to say it in the present tense, or more like a command, basically, as add character. It doesn't really matter.
It's not like adding character.
Yeah, so you can do whatever you want. You're going to be understood anyway, but what most professional repositories look like are this add character or change message .txt. I have no idea why they do that. That's just what they do.
I heard that it was because when you do git revert on it, it makes more sense, like grammatically, to say like, oh, hey, let's apply that change. What does it do? It adds a character. As opposed to saying, what does it do? It added a character.
Yeah.
It's like semantic.
Yeah.
We're getting weird errors.
Let me see.
We love weird errors.
That's good. When you mess up. Don't mess up. Ever.
Does anyone else have questions?
Certificate verify locations.
What's your favorite food?
Potatoes.
Yeah,
You give
so
it that
I've
look.
had
What was
this
that look for?
certificate thing before.
See, but because potatoes can be used in like
you
many
literally don't
multiple
know how to
things.
fix it.
They have so much nutrients in, I think.
They have a good amount of fiber. They can have vitamin
They have carbs. I think they
Yeah,
also have
so
protein,
basically,
maybe.
so,
So it's just like,
can you
could, like,
just uninstall and reinstall
or
Git?
like people like
Uninstall,
survived on.
Potatoes.
So basically
love
just
vitamins.
run the install.
Someone did like
Okay.
a 30-day potato diet.
So, getting back to it. So, my change is called change message.txt. So, the semantics there is git commit -m, one dash, and it's lowercase m. And if you have multiple words, which you're usually going to, you want to surround them in quotes. How Bash works is every argument that you pass to a program is separated by spaces, but the message that you're passing is one argument. So in order to tell Bash that it's one argument, you put it in quotes. Another thing, you can git commit m. Yes?
Are those quotes single quotes? Double or is it
I don't think it matters.
It might matter when you want to open this.
I would fall back to double quotes. That's what I always do.
Just don't do single quotes.
So it's just git commit, right? So if you just type git commit, something will happen and you'll enter this screen. Depending on how you installed Git Bash, you may enter a different screen. It may open a different window. But basically what this is if you don't specify a message, it's going to ask you one anyway. What you're doing here is basically editing a file, and whatever you type in here in this file is going to be your Git message. So I can type modify message.txt. So anything in under this isn't going to be committed. Anything you type up here that isn't prefixed by a hash is going to be your commit message. Usually it's way easier to just type -m, but if you ever find yourself here, this is what you're doing. And then you basically, oh, no. Cancel. Get out of here. Yes, that. And so I have committed. Any questions so far? All right. So, git pull. This is very important. So, in this cycle, we've added our commits, we've made a commit. Now, logically, you would think we should share our commit with our collaborators. However, if you do that, you will probably break something. And the reason is you don't know if any of your teammates have pushed something since the last time you downloaded changes. So Git doesn't magically keep track of changes that happened, what we say upstream. It doesn't magically know that anything has been pushed to the remote repository. So if you add changes on your machine and try to push them, and then one of your team members does a change and it changes the same file, then they try to push it, then the remote repository can't really handle that. And usually it's just going to say that you can't push, but it might break something. You generally don't want to do it. So once you've made your commit, you want to pull changes to make sure that you have the most up-to-date repository. So I am going to pull, and I don't know if I explained this. What pulling does is it just downloads the changes from the remote, and there have been no changes since I last pulled. So now I'm free to git push, and git push is what it sounds. It pushes all the changes you made onto the remote, and once they're there, your teammates can pull, and they will have your changes. Does that make sense? Okay, so now I am going to push, and well, once I log in, you'll probably be asked for a login. It will probably open a window like this. Did someone just push?
I only pulled.
Okay, someone had pushed.
Oh no. We got merge
Oh.
conflicts
Now we get to
already.
show you
What?
like,
So-
when you
Yeah.
hit simultaneously.
All right, so
It's
this is going to
happening.
happen a lot. If you're very new to Git, something is going to go wrong, and Git won't be able to handle it. We call these merge conflicts. So, a
Should
merge.
we move to the slides that talk about this?
Yeah. So let me
Dumpster fire.
password. We also have to do this. Merge conflicts. So what just happened is I made a change to a file, and someone else on a different computer made a different change to the same file. So Git, if those changes are contradictory, so I made a change that like deletes something, and then a different change, adds something or changes something in a different way. Git isn't able to handle that. There's no real solution to what you want, what you're asking Git to do. So when Git can't handle something, it basically goes into a fail state, which is a merge conflict, and we don't have to manufacture this. What it does is it modifies the file for you, and so it says our version of the file should look like this, but we pulled a change where it should look like this. So if we open up our message.txt file, we can see it looks different. So our version should say, Lippo says he loves you and hopes you're having a super fantastic day. Someone else made a change where they said the message was, Lippo says he loves you and hopes you're having a fantastic day, exclamation point, exclamation point. Git wasn't able to figure out how to solve this. There really is no way to automatically solve this because they're incompatible lines. So I'm going to say, whoever made that, screw you, my version's better. you're going to have to live with it. So, what I did there was, this is basically what it looked like. My version was on top, the changed version was on the bottom. I deleted the changed version up to this equals like sign, and then I also deleted this head sign. And so I made it look like exactly what I wanted the file to look like. Git will do this whenever, with any file that it can't figure out how to merge together. So if it ever does this, you go in and you manually edit the file to make it look like what you want it to look like.
I think if you edit a conflicted file with VS Code, it'll actually highlight those lines for you. So like if you have a really big file with a conflict in it, then you can easily find it that way.
Yeah. If you see this garbage on the bottom, this is telling you the commit ID or UID or something. This basically just identifies the commit. You usually don't have to worry about that, but if you want to be technical and know exactly what commit is causing this, this is what tells you what it is. So I have changed my file, and now that I've done that, I can hit git status, and it will say, this is basically going to tell you which files are in conflict when you're having a merge conflict. It'll say both modified. And of course it was message.txt. I've done that, and now we're going to basically act like I just made a change and I want to push it. So we're going to git add period, git add dot, whatever, git commit m, my version is better. And then I'm going to pull again because one of you probably pushed, and then I'm going to push. I'm going to sign in again.
This shouldn't happen to you. If it does,
Yeah.
then
I believe it will ask you to be able to save your login info, your credentials, so you don't have to do this every time.
I bet someone else pushed. Oh no.
Oh no, okay. So now, all of you can pull the changes that I made, and your file will look like this.
If you have a merge conflict.
Now you know how to solve it. So, you may not be able to push yet, though. Git needs to know a little bit about you in order to be able to push to remote repositories. How Git was initially done is they were actually sharing change files over email for the original Linux kernel. So they would export, their changes, and then they would send an email to someone. They would download the changes and add them. So they were identified by their username and their email. So you have to have a username and an email in order to push to a remote repository. You can also add your password. My password is not saved, and it's not required. It will ask you if you need a password. But your user email, and I believe your username, is required. If you put your email as the same one that you used in your GitHub account, then it will identify your commits on GitHub as made by you. Does that make sense? Okay. So yeah, the syntax is git config -- global user dot whatever. It can be email, name, or password, surrounded in quotes, the actual username or password or whatever. I don't think we need to do the partner activity thing because we.
What if you have a non-text file, like say an image?
Right. So those are basically handled the same way by default.
Go into a text editor and
If you have a merge conflict with a binary file, you can't. I don't know that it's actually going to be able to change that file and say like this was changed. Usually, and I don't think we go into this right now, there is a way to say I want my version or I want your version without actually editing the file. There's also a different method of doing that GitHub developed called large file system, Git LFS, in which you actually lock binary files and nobody else can modify them. But it's later. So, does anyone else have any other questions? Okay. So, more advanced tricks that you might not use all the time, but are kind of handy to know that they exist and that you can do them. Stashing in order to pull without committing. So sometimes you just want to have your teammates' changes, but you are in the middle of something and you don't want to commit your changes because they're not finalized. So you can do something called stashing. So stashing is going to take all of your changes since the last time you committed, and it's going to take a note of them and then revert your working directory to the previous commit. So say I change message.txt and I say, edit this word, but I'm not done. Super fantastic. I can go ahead and git status and modified, and then I can git stash and wait. And now that I have stashed my commit, it is reverted to the last time that I pulled, and my edit is no longer there. So in this state, you don't have to commit your changes. You can pull changes, and if anything changed, you can reapply your changes on top of those changes. So that is called git stash pop. It's basically popping off a stack or whatever. Basically reapplies the changes that you stashed. So git stash pop. Now I have modified this. Do we want to do this?
We do not have
Okay.
time.
We don't have time for this. So another thing, I don't know if we mentioned it in the slideshow. Sometimes you made a change and you just kind of like, okay, that didn't work. I don't want these changes anymore. It actually tells you in your git status line that you can discard all of your changes without, saving them. So if you want to do that, the command is git checkout -- and then file. So if you want to do a specific file, you can type message.txt. Just like git add, you can type dot, and it will get rid of all of your changes since the last commit or pull or whatever, and you will lose all of your progress. You will lose all of your progress. So don't do this if you're unsure.
It's dangerous.
It's very dangerous. So now if I git status, it's like you don't have any changes. This is back to being that. I do that all the time. If I'm like changing something and I just like, okay, I threw at that. I'm just gonna check that out. So if you want to have like a reference of how to do that, git status will just tell you. If you've modified something, it'll say use git checkout -- file to discard. Next, we have PullRebase. This is kind of a complicated one with like some nuances that you don't really ever have to do this. You can just completely ignore this exists, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway. So git pull is underlyingly two functions or commands. It's git fetch, and then a git merge. So git fetch will basically download changes from the remote repository, but it's not going to apply them just yet. It'll say, okay, we know about these. They're in the remote repository, but we're not going to do anything to the local repository just yet. When you do want to merge those changes in, it's called git merge. And so that's going to take your remote, your origin, and it's going to merge it into your local. Git pull automates this. It just does both at the same time. However, if you made a commit before you pulled, then it might ask you to make another commit that says, okay, we merged these two independent branches. Illustrating this, this is something I got. This GitHub can visualize this kind of thing for you. If we look at this history, basically going from most recent at the top to oldest at the bottom, we can see each one of these nodes is a commit. So computer 1 made a commit here, here, and here. Then computer 2, or no.
There's two things going on.
Yeah. So computer 2 made a commit here. Computer 1 made a couple more commits. And then computer 2 made another commit. So we can see that computer 2 didn't pull before making this commit. So according to computer 2, these two commits don't exist until computer 2 pulls, in which case it thinks that there are two basically branches of the repository, and it needs to say, okay, we need to merge these two branches, and we need an extra commit to do that. And at the very top, we have merge commit. However, we can see that this is really just a linear sequence of events. So if we look at it how it is by default, it's a little confusing. We don't actually ever really make a new branch. It just kind of looks like we do because that computer 2 commit didn't know that those first two commits existed. Git Rebase will basically prevent this. So if you git pull -- rebase, it's going to take any commit that you made and basically reapply it on top of whatever commits that you pull. Yeah. So basically, it's going to say if computer 2 did a git pull -- rebase, it's going to basically stash this computer 2's commit. It's going to basically revert their repository down to this first computer 2 commit, and then it's going to add this commit right here. I might be able to point to it on the mouse. It's going to add this commit, and then it's going to reapply this commit on top of it, as if it was made after pulling these two commits here. Technically, that's not what happened according to Git, but if you git PullRebase, it will look more linear and make a little bit more sense. So the pros of doing this: if you ever look at your Git history, then and you have been rebasing as you pull, then it's going to look. It's going to make more sense. If you don't do this, you're going to have a lot of commits that don't have really anything in them. They just are merge commits, and that dirties the Git history. It also deals with merge conflicts differently. So if there was a conflict between this commit and one of these commits, it would basically treat those two computer 1 commits as one commit and deal with all of the merge conflicts all at once. However, if you rebase, it's only going to deal with it between computer 2 and computer 1, if that makes any sense. It is sometimes easier to deal with that way if the commits were made in a linear fashion. So generally, it's just nicer. However, it's not always the best thing to do. Technically, it's called rewriting history because your commit wasn't actually made before pulling those other commits. And when you rewrite history, then some bad things can happen. However, Git PullRebase only changes your local history, so it's not that bad. So yeah, some people don't like doing it. I like doing it. Yeah.
There's also one other pro to it, which is you can't really revert anything past a merge. Because
Yeah.
a merge will pull in old files that if
Yeah.
you were to revert something from it, the merge would have incorporated it anyway.
Yeah. So this merge is basically packaging all of these commits at the same into the same commit, and you can't really revert into each of these independently. If you rebase, it will make more sense. You can revert to any of these commits independently.
How much do we have left? Because we're like out of time.
1 minute.
We have a little bit more, but we're going to go over this tomorrow in the general meeting anyway. So yeah, we can basically just be done. One last thing. We just have like a page full of tips. Always pull when you sit down to work. So basically, if you're starting to work, you want to pull from the remote repository to get all of the recent changes. This will save a lot of time because if you're working on an old version, then you don't have all of the changes and you might have to deal with merge conflicts. So this, communicate with your team about your repository. All Git merge conflicts happen because two team members weren't communicating that they were editing the same file. So if you have two programmers on your team, you need to be able to communicate that, okay, so you're working on the player, you're working on the enemy. If they both work on the player, then you're probably going to run into a merge conflict. And this I don't do personally very often, but you can consider developing features in different branches. So say you want to add a player feature like shooting a gun, you can branch and then pull that. It's not always useful, but you can do it. Is that good? Is everyone cool with that? All right, cool. We are done.
Any last questions? All right, we are gonna break